I grew up in a very loving household. I had 3 loving older brothers. Click. I had 3 loving older brothers. I'm the little guy laughing. It's funny that this picture, it looks so perfect and posed, but I was usually not laughing like that. But it was a really competitive household. There were times I was, tied under the piano and left with a sock in my mouth. We were lucky enough to have some cousins who had 1 pair of boxing gloves. And if you have 4 boys, 1 pair is perfect because you have 2 managers, the big guys on the left there, and then 2 combatants, my brother Rich and I. And it was also cool because there was 1 right glove and 1 left glove, and my brother was left-handed. So we would go into the basement at my cousin's house and just be set at it. So it was a perfect training in the gladiatorial arts, and it was a very competitive upbringing. It was also a family of very high standards, and my parents wanted us to really do well in life. So let's fast forward about 30 years. I had checked a lot of the boxes of a great career. I had a couple promotions under my belt. I went to one of the top business schools in the country, and I was winning. I was doing great. I was living in San Francisco, and I was offered a job to take over as a vice president of an enterprise software company, a startup. And I was so excited that I moved my family up from the Bay Area to take advantage of this opportunity. And it was really a great company, great technology, high growth rate. We grew over 100% a year for a few years. But have you ever felt like on paper it's a dream job, but in reality it's more of a nightmare? Or you thought you were part of an amazing culture, at least that's how it looked from the outside, but then once you get inside, you realize there are elements of that are very toxic to your well-being. So that was when I only had 2 kids, around the time, 2005 or so, when to the outside world, it probably looked like I was, happy as a clam, but unfortunately, I was going on road trips and just coming back exhausted and doing work in a toxic culture that didn't give me more energy, but rather it took energy away from me. And one time after a particularly rough trip, I woke up in the morning and took a shower and rinsed off and was looking at myself in this foggy mirror, and everything looked gray. I didn't recognize myself. The face looking back at me from the other side of the mirror was empty and devoid of life and spirit. I was arguing too much with my wife, and I wasn't there for my kids. So it's hard not to recognize yourself, and I really related it all back to my work. I wasn't connected, I wasn't inspired, and the company I worked for wasn't a great company. And I thought to myself, I want that feeling back that I've had before, where I wake up every morning inspired, excited, and focused on doing great work. I know not every morning might be unrealistic, but most mornings, most of the time, I want to feel really great about my job. And I made a decision that day to quit. Luckily for me, there was someone nearby working for a really large, well-known company who also had a great this company had a great reputation, but it was a little bit different on the inside. That was Laura Hamill, one of the co-founders of Limeade, who's I got to meet Dr. Hamill at a coffee shop one time. And it turns out that sometimes even the biggest companies have managers who think it's okay to yell at you every single day, or to have competitive environments, maybe like my upbringing, but in the workplace, where there are glass ceilings, or where abusive behavior is okay, or where maybe they take competitiveness a little bit too far. And the impact on Laura's life, instead of just being a sense of existential dread, was actually much worse. It was chronic stress-induced autoimmune disorders. And so we got to meet because I had this idea that you could measure and improve well-being in work and in life, and I thought it would be cool to meet someone and talk about that. And it happened that the only psychometrics person on LinkedIn I knew told me the best person he'd ever worked with was Laura. And so we met for a coffee for 30 minutes. That 30 minutes turned into about a 3-hour discussion, and we made kind of a pact to build a company that was supportive, to build a great company, and a company that was focused on improving well-being and engagement. So that was 12 years ago. It's very humbling for me now to think, wow, there's like 250 people in the audience and this exciting energy. So even though, if you flash back to the early days, that's me at the back of the table, Laura, Eric Rivas there in the front, our Chief Technology Officer. We got this small crew together, and to think of the progress we've made is amazing. On the other hand, I feel like the people in this room are the seed that's going to grow into something much bigger, and we don't know what it is yet. And that's really exciting to me. It hasn't always been easy. We've had to rely on some of the well-being concepts we learned about 12 years ago, like resilience and optimism and mindfulness and sense of team and making and keeping commitments. So why are we here today? We're here because the world of work is broken. Just like it was a little bit broken for me, there's a lot of suffering. There's a lot of self-medicating. There's a lot of stress and depression. People feel on one end of the spectrum disengaged from work, unsupported, maybe untrained, and on the other end, so into it but never given a break that they're burning out physically, or they're quitting and leaving the company and kind of ending their dream at that place. They're also feeling alone, socially disconnected, isolated. We've seen all these interesting correlations lately between health issues and social disconnection. Despite all the modern technology we have, we're not making the same types of connections we used to make in the workplace or in life. And adding on to these well-being and engagement and inclusion and social connection issues, you guys in this room have kind of a hard job. You have 50 different things to connect together using baling wire and bubble gum and some technology and APIs. You're really fighting and competing with other VPs in your own company for the mind share and the attention of the employees you're sworn to serve. And you have to do all this with fewer resources and a tight budget on a short timeline. Am I right? So we've got this broken work world. We have well-being and engagement and other opportunities, but I feel like we can tackle these challenges. We need to wipe the fog off the mirror and kind of wake ourselves up. And yeah, there's a mountain to climb ahead, but it's not Mount Everest. I feel like we can do it. We've got the ropes and the ladders, and we can connect things together. It'll probably take some resilience and teamwork and optimism and all that other well-being stuff to do it. It's not going to be one person, one company, not even one conference is going to change everything, but we're here to help you find your voice. I hope I find my voice too, but find our voice together and have that voice echo on the factory floor, in the break room, in the retail store, in the C-suite. And together, we can be very intentional about the values that we stand for. This is actually, when we first started our company, we wrote down the values of our company. Since then, they've evolved into something a little bit maybe better looking than that scrap of paper. But we all stand for something too. And we want to stand for making change and helping other people make change. So we've come a long way from that back room, having a glass of wine, launching a company, and writing down those values. We have a long way to go. And together, we want you all to unlock your inner change makers. Thank you. Stephen?
I get a little worried about myself sometimes because every time I hear that song, I want to dance, and you're going to hear that song every time I come up on stage. So at some point, I might break out in a dance. My name's Stephen Parker. I'm responsible for customer success at Limeade, and welcome to Engage. Yeah. It was fun seeing a lot of you out at the welcome reception last night. What a beautiful night, right? I don't know if you heard Henry say this. There's over 250 people here representing over 80 companies and representing over 1.8, almost 2 million actually, 1.9-ish people in the world. So you change makers have the opportunity to inspire, to improve the well-being, and to drive employee engagement for almost 2 million people. That's a pretty big responsibility, right? And a pretty huge opportunity. And it reminds me of something that Grandma Parker used to tell me when I was faced with big challenges. You ready for this? Don't mess it up. So Grandma Parker was really inspiring. We have an opportunity as change makers to influence the lives of over 2 million people. And frankly, those 2 million people have the opportunity to influence the lives of many, many more. So what is a change maker? Change makers are bold, they're brave, they're positive. They recognize that the old way of doing things doesn't work, right? Frankly, when I'm a recovering HR practitioner. I'm on like the 11th of 12 steps. And when I grew up in HR, it was all about creating a great place where great people could do great things, right? Change makers know we got to get back to that. And making change is hard, but the path is clear. In fact, it's really clear to people outside of this room. I was in a plane the other day going to a conference, and for those of you who know me, I'm the loud talker when I'm on my phone on meetings and stuff like that. So I was talking loud, and my seatmate overheard me, and she turned to me, and I said, you know, I'm really sorry. And she goes, no, no, no. What you were talking about sounded really interesting. What do you do? And I said, I work for Limeade. We're an employee engagement company that helps build great companies by improving well-being and strengthening culture. And I thought she'd be like, yeah, whatever, and go back to her drink. But she said, really, I've been thinking a lot about that lately. And I was like, oh, do you work for Virgin Pulse or a competitor? Like, you're trying to steal my ideas? But no, she's like, no, I've been thinking a lot about that lately. I think people think about their relationship with their companies just like they think about their relationship with other people. You want the same thing from your relationship with your significant other, for example, as you do with your company. And I said, tell me more. And she goes, well, what do you want from your relationship with your significant other? You want to feel safe, secure, you want to have fun, you want to grow, but most of all, you want a sense of mutual commitment. You want to know that they care about you as much as you care about them. And when that's true, when that works, the relationship grows. And you know, in companies, we call that employee engagement, right? And when it's not true, that relationship disintegrates. And I said, you know what, you're right. And I started thinking about that in the well-being space. Imagine if I went home after that conference to my wife and I said, honey, I noticed on the Fitbit app that your BMI is a little bit out of whack. So I thought of these 3 things that you should do this week. I think it's a pretty reasonable alternative to not having your BMI in range. And if you don't do those things, babe, I'm going to need you to contribute a little bit more to the bills. Like, imagine what would happen to our relationship if I did that, right? Wouldn't last very long. But we do that to our employees all the time. Some of us in this room are still doing that to our people, right? But the flip side is true. We know that when our people feel like we're authentically investing in them, they will authentically invest in our organization, and that's how we build great companies. And that's our call to action in unlocking our inner change maker. Let's be different. So I want to give you a couple of housekeeping notes. First of all, you have this cool workbook. There's an agenda in there, but it's more than an agenda. Our artists at Limeade got inspired by the Savannah College of Arts and Design, which is all over the place in downtown Savannah. Had a little fun with the art in here, but there's also things like challenges to keep you focused on your well-being while you're at the conference for the next couple of days. An opportunity to track notes, maps and directions for some of the places that we're going to take you, and the opportunity to bring some ideas back to your company. So keep this with you. This will be your toolbook for the next couple of days. A few more notes. We want you to make your mark in terms of art. We had a SCAD artist last night who started painting a beautiful watercolor about unlocking your inner change maker. We encourage you to go out to the pavilion, visit some of our friends who are in this journey with us to improve well-being and drive employee engagement, and actually put your thumbprint on that picture out there. And we'll share the results with all of you when we're done. That symbolizes unlocking your inner change maker and going on this journey with us. There's food and drinks out in the pavilion. We promise to keep you hydrated. If you need something, you can go out there, but we like it when you come back because we think we have a pretty exciting agenda. Restrooms are down the hallway that way. That way. Sorry. That way. And then the Wi-Fi password is Limeade Engage, all lowercase, if you need to stay connected. In fact, if you are connected, by the way, we're live streaming this out to the rest of the world too. And if you are connected, we encourage you to share your thoughts, your ahas, your cool pictures of people being change makers at this conference by sharing hashtag Limeade Engage. All right. So without further ado, I'm excited to welcome our first keynote, Daniel Pink. He's the author of 5 provocative books about the changing world of work, including the long-running New York Times bestseller, A Whole New Mind, and the #1 New York Times bestseller, Drive, which happens to be one of only 2 books that I've read all the way through since college, so it's a little embarrassing. By the way, the other one was about Led Zeppelin, so you can see Dan's pretty high up there in my pantheon. His last real job was at the White House, where he served from 1995 to 1997 as chief speechwriter for Vice President Gore. Currently, he hosts Crowd Control, a series on National Geographic Television that takes problems and creates solutions using unique design technology and behavioral science principles. He received a BA from Northwestern University. He lives in Washington, D.C. with his wife and their 3 children. Please welcome Dan Pink.
Good to be here. Let me strap this on. I'm excited to be here to talk about.
He took it off.
All right, here we go. Well, this is okay. Wow, how about this? Unfortunately, we're now out of time. So it is good to be here to talk about engagement, and I want to talk to you about the latest batch of research that I've done. It's memorialized in a book called When, The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing that came out about 90 days ago. Okay. And I want to tell you about some of the research in there before I get started on my next book, which will be about Led Zeppelin. Let's talk about timing. Or we all know that timing is everything. And that actually had me intrigued as someone who studies the workplace. Timing is everything, right? And it had me intrigued, but it also had me a little bit frustrated Because in my own life, I was making all kinds of timing decisions. When should I do this kind of work? When should I do that kind of work? When should I exercise? When should I start a project? When should I abandon a project that's not working? And I was making those decisions in a very haphazard way. And I don't like making decisions in a haphazard way. And so I started looking around for guidance. How can I make these decisions about when to do things in a smarter, more systematic way? And I found that that guidance didn't exist. So out of that frustration came some curiosity. I said, well, there's got to be some research on this. I spent a lot of my writing life looking at social science, trying to make it understandable. And I said, there's got to be some research on this question of when to do stuff. And it turned out there's a lot of research on this question. There's a huge amount of research on this question. The problem, the challenge, the opportunity, call it what you will, is that this research is in many, 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 many different fields. It's in economics, it's in social psychology, but it's also in molecular biology. There's a whole field called chronobiology. It's in endocrinology. It's in anesthesiology. It's in all these different fields. And if you think that corporate America is siloed, let me introduce you to the university, because universities are the most siloed places on the planet. So the economists don't talk to the psychologists don't talk to the anthropologists, nobody's talking to the endocrinologists, perhaps understandably, and yet they're all asking very, very similar questions. What's the effect of time of day on what we do and how we do it? How do beginnings affect us? How do midpoints affect us? How do endings affect us? And it turns out, hidden in this massive research out there, literally dozens and dozens of fields, literally hundreds and hundreds of studies, is some of the guidance that I was seeking. Guidance to help us make systematically better, smarter decisions about when to do things. And so at the top level, what I discovered is this, that we believe that timing is an art, but timing is really a science. We believe that timing is an art, but timing is really a science. We've been making our decisions, especially in the workplace, about timing issues based on intuition and guesswork. And that's the wrong way to do it. We can make these decisions based on evidence. And then if we think about this broad topic that you're talking about here, that LimeMates specializes in, when we think about engagement, there is a temporal, a time-based, a when-based aspect to engagement that we have completely neglected. So what I want to do here, so this research is totally interesting. I'm able to only share a slice of it with you today, but it answers some really, really intriguing questions. Questions like this: when should you exercise? Early in the day or late? Very clear answer to that question. Oh, I don't intend to give it to you, but it's very clear. We can talk about that maybe in Q&A. Why should you never go into a hospital, take a standardized test, or make a crucial business decision in the afternoon? For real. If you learn nothing else here, you might learn nothing about engagement, but I hope that you will learn that you should never, if you can avoid it, go to a hospital in the afternoon. For reals. When should you ask your boss for a raise? Turns out there's some guidance in the research about the timing aspects of this question. All right, we woke up a few people with that one. Why does beginning your career in a recession depress your wages 20 years later? Some incredible research on how the initial labor market conditions of somebody's career have a huge effect on their earnings, literally 2 decades into their career. Other questions. Why don't teams actually get started until the midpoint of a project? Some really interesting research from Connie Gersick at UCLA showing that if you give a team this amount of time to do a project, they'll get started here. You give them this much time, they'll get started here. Give a team 31 days, they get started on day 15 or 16. Give a team 11 days, they get started on day 6. What's going on with that? Other kinds of questions. Why is singing in a choir as good for your physical and mental health as exercise? Anybody here a choral singer? You two are going to outlive the rest of us, clearly. And you're actually going to lead much more engaged lives. You're going to have a higher sense of well-being. Why is that? What is it about synchronizing with other people? Whether it's that makes us feel good, makes us do good. How can we foster environments where people are able to synchronize in time? Other questions. I hope this is not on your mind, but I am a full-service operation here to respond to this. When during the year is your spouse most likely to file for divorce? And it turns out there are 2 monthly spikes every year, dramatic spikes in divorce filings all across the United States. So if you made it through last month, you're in good shape till August. But what I want to do, you know, focusing on this question of engagement, focusing on this question of well-being, is I want to take just three sections of this research, tell you about those, because I think what it will do, what I'm hoping to do here, is give you a is broaden the dimension of your thinking about what constitutes engagement on the job and what constitutes well-being on the job, right? So we're going to start off with the first one here. Now, the first idea here that I want to share with you is this. The hidden pattern of the day profoundly affects our mood and our performance. The hidden pattern of the day profoundly affects our mood and our performance. This is the first of three sets of ideas that I want to give you. It is arguably the most important. It's the most important because of the following reasons. When we think about time, this is new to me as someone who is researching time. When I never really thought, all these things that I thought were natural units of time are not natural at all. So a second is not a real thing. A second is something that human beings have invented. A week is not a real thing. It's something that human beings have invented. But a day is a thing. All right? This is a level of scientific sophistication I'm bringing to you here in Savannah this morning, right? A day is a thing. We're on a planet. It's turning. It takes a day for it to turn. So a day is a real thing. It is a natural phenomenon. So how does the day affect what we do, how we do it, how we feel about doing it, what our well-being is, how engaged we are on the job? The hidden pattern of the day profoundly affects our mood and our performance. I'm going to hit you with a lot of science here this morning. So what I want to do here is I want to start out with 2 studies about mood and 2 studies about performance. 2 studies about mood, 2 studies about performance. Let's go to the first study, which is about mood. Now, one of the things that's going on, and you guys as HR practitioners, you know this, in the whole world, which has emerged in the last 7 or 8 years of people analytics, right? Big data. All right, big data, I'll give you my view on big data. Big data is overhyped in the short run and underhyped in the long run. It's a big deal. It's not a big deal yet. It's a huge deal everywhere, not just in people analytics, throughout the enterprise, throughout other aspects of our lives. What big data allows us to do, at some level, this is a cliche analogy here, but I think it fits. Big data, to me, is akin to a microscope, right? Before there was a microscope, there was stuff we couldn't see. We didn't even know it existed, right? You have a microscope, holy smokes, there's a whole world down there. I never knew this was there. I can see stuff I never saw before. That's what big data is allowing us to do. So a lot of the research in this emerging field of the science of timing is using ginormous data sets to find insights. Let me tell you about the first one. There's a program out there, a software program called LIWC, L-I-W-C, the Linguistic Inventory Word Count. Think of it as a giant text analyzer. So we can take these gigantic bodies of text and analyze them. So you could take a novelist, like say Virginia Woolf or James Patterson or whoever, take these novels, put all the novels into this program, and it can tell you how often are women speaking, how often are men speaking, how often is the setting at night, how often is it during the day, what is the emotional level of the words that they're using here, how often is it passive tense, how often is it active tense, how many adjectives do they use, what's the ratio of adverbs to verbs, all those kinds of things that would otherwise take an army of English PhD students to do. So these 2 researchers at Cornell decided to use this program to analyze a very different body of text, not novels, but a different, more peculiar, somewhat stranger collection of text, tweets. They looked at 500 million tweets. That's a lot of tweets. 500 million tweets. 500 million tweets from 2.5 million users, none of whom were president of the United States, in 84 countries. One of these things this program can do is it can measure the emotional level of the words that are being used. Is it a positive word, a negative word, a neutral word? So they took, think about this for a second. I want you to grok like what a big deal this is. Think about reading through 500 million tweets. Think about reading through 1,000 tweets. Think about how long that would take you. Now, think about another 1,000. Think about another 1,000. Think about another 1,000, okay? Think about how long that would take you. You still have 496,000 tweets to go after that. 500 million tweets, half a billion tweets. We're measuring the emotional level of the words that are being used there. But remember, tweets come with a timestamp. So you can take these words, the emotional levels of the words, and match them up to time of day and get a window. Remember, this is like a microscope. Get a window into, do our moods as revealed in our tweets change over the course of a day? What did it look like? Here's what it looked like. Mood went up, mood went down, mood recovered. You had over here, you had a peak, a trough, and a recovery. A peak, a trough, and a recovery. Mood was up, then it went down, then it went back up again. Peak, trough, recovery. Peak, trough, recovery. Now think about that for a second. You had an elevated mood here, then it dropped, then it went back up. Pretty interesting. So we are at a decent port of the day, but it's all going downhill. So that's one measure of mood. Let's go to another measure of mood. There's a fellow whom you've all heard of, many of you have heard of, named Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman is a psychologist. He won a Nobel Prize in economics. He came up with another methodology, working with with economists like Alan Kruger, the former head of the Council of Economic Advisors for President Obama. They came up with another methodology. They call it the day reconstruction method. The day reconstruction method. What they do is they ask people, write down the episodes of your day, the time it occurs, and how you're feeling about it. So you could write down 7:30 a.m., commuting to work. I'm a 3 out of 10 in well-being and happiness and subjective well-being, right? And actually commuting was the lowest point of the day for most people, right? Then you can say, oh, I write down, you know, 8:45 a.m. Oh, I'm here with Limeade in Savannah, Georgia. I'm a 9.8 out of 10 in well-being. And so you collect, so you have people record this, write down their day-to-day, literally their episode-to-episode feelings, mood, plot that against time of day, and here's what they did. It's a slightly different chart. They took positive mood minus negative mood. So you can think of this next chart as net good mood. Net good mood. What they found was, once again, a peak, mood went up, mood went down, mood recovered. Peak, trough, recovery. Peak, trough, recovery. Now look at this chart and this chart. They're not identical, but they rhyme. Up, down, up. Peak, trough, recovery. Mood goes up, mood craters, mood recovers over the course of a day. And what's interesting about this is, remember, I mentioned the multidisciplinary aspect of this. No matter what the discipline scholars are using, no matter what the methodology they're deploying, they keep finding this pattern over the course of a day. Mood goes up, mood goes down, mood recovers. Okay, so think about it. So let's stick that over here on this shelf for a moment. It's a thin shelf, but we'll stick it over here. All right? That's mood. Now remember, I promised to talk about mood and performance. We care about performance, right? Mood affects performance, but obviously performance affects mood. So do these patterns, these daily patterns, affect performance? Here's where it gets really interesting. I'm going to give you 2 studies about this, then we'll pay it off with what to do about it. Here, I think it's going to get super duper interesting. Here's a study out of NYU. It has to do with corporate earnings calls. Corporate earnings calls. How many of you work for public companies? All right, a lot of you. Okay, so public companies have earnings calls every quarter. Have any of you ever participated in these earnings calls or helped prep? Okay, so I might want to ask you some questions about this. So, every quarter, usually the CEO and the CFO and some other maybe senior executives have a call with analysts, with journalists, report the quarter's numbers, answer questions, give guidance for the following quarter, et cetera. These are pretty significant conversations. Public company earnings calls are transcribed. Once something is transcribed, it becomes text. We bring in our old friend, this program over here. This program over here is agnostic to what kind of text you feed it. It can feed you, I'll take the sports section of the Washington Post. I'll take 500 million tweets. Oh, you want to give me some transcripts of conference calls? Bring it on. So these NYU researchers took 26,000 earnings calls transcripts. All right? I just want you to wrap your minds around the numbers. Think about reading one. of these earnings calls transcripts, if you've ever seen the transcripts of it. All right? It's not great reading. Now think about doing 26,000 of them. 2,100 companies over 6.5 years. They were originally looking for something else. But they decided, let's check the emotional sentiment of the words that are being used in these calls and see, is there any pattern in mood as reflected in the words being used in these conference calls? And the answer was, yeah. Take a look. Afternoon calls were more negative, irritable, and combative, leading to temporary stock mispricings for firms hosting earnings calls later in the day. Good. So I see a few more phones came out to take pictures of that. That's exactly the right response to that. That is peculiar. What the heck? Now, here's the thing. They say that's kind of weird, so they control for fundamentals, right? Maybe it's simply that companies with bad news are giving their bad news in the afternoon. You control for fundamentals, same thing. Afternoon earnings calls were more negative, irritable, and combative, leading to temporary stock mispricings for firms hosting earnings calls later in the day. Now, who has, I'm going to ask you some questions. Who has participated in conference calls or helped their executives get ready for conference calls? So there's a woman right back on the right field line. Tell me your first name. Yes, you, the woman looking behind you. Yeah. Sarah, all right. I had to pick the person who's literally the furthest in distance from me, but that's okay, Sarah. So typically, who participates in these calls, Sarah? Okay, CEOs, CFOs, and members of the senior team. All right, and so in general, I don't want to talk about your company in particular, Sarah, but in general, do these people are reasonably competent? Yes, all right. Without further explanation, she says, yes, they are reasonably competent. All right. More important, Sarah, on your experience, do these reasonably competent people, these CEOs, CFOs, senior executives, do they prepare for these things? Endlessly. Tell us how they prepare for these things, Sarah. Lots of pre-meetings, right? Do they rehearse? A lot. Do they anticipate questions and go over answers to those questions? All the time, all right? Now, final question for you, Sarah. Do these people, these reasonably competent senior executives, CFOs, CEOs, who are extraordinary, who have prepared, your word, endlessly for this, do they have anything at stake? A lot. What do they have at stake, Sarah? Their equity. Very good. I have to say, you're getting the maximum value per syllable for your answers here, Sarah. So I admire your communication skills. So think about that. Sarah, who's been in the belly of the beast, preparing executives for these calls, says these CEOs and CFOs, they know what they're doing. They're extremely well prepared. They have literally millions of dollars at stake, and still they're leaking. They're performing differently because of the different time of the day, to the point where it has a temporary effect on the stock price. I'm convinced there's someone out there, and maybe it's a SCAD student, who has written a program to exploit the difference between the true price and the temporary mispricing from negative sentiment. It's so bad that these researchers do something researchers rarely do. They give advice. They say an important takeaway from our study for corporate executives is that communications with investors and probably other critical managerial decisions and negotiations should be conducted earlier in the day. Let's go to another world. Let's talk about education. Let's talk about education. And let's talk about standardized test scores in Denmark. Why are we talking about Denmark? Because something gorgeous happened in Denmark. Here's what happened. Students in Denmark take standardized tests, as do, just as students here in the United States do. Those students who take standardized tests in Denmark, they take the test not on pencil and paper, but they take the test on computers. Now, here's the challenge. Typical Danish school has more students than computers, so everybody can't take the test at the same time. As a consequence, the students are randomly assigned to take the test at different times of day. Some take them in the morning, some take, you're nodding here, you know where this is going. Some take them in the afternoon. What effect does that have? Here's what they say. Looking at, again, we're not messing around here, 2 million Danish test scores. This is research led by Francesca Gino at Harvard, okay? We're not saying, oh, we have 15 kids in this condition and 15 kids in this condition. We're saying we're going to look at a few years of standardized test scores and analyze the results of 2 million tests. What do they find? For every hour later in the day, scores decrease. We find that an hour later in the day causes a deterioration in test score that is equivalent to slightly lower household income, less parental education, and missing 2 weeks of school. So you had this kid takes a test in the morning, this kid takes a test in the afternoon, this kid scores as if she's missed 2 weeks of school. Now that should alarm us. We're making education policy based on test scores, and there's this big effect of time of day. Here's something more alarming. Are we going to make decisions about this kid based on her test scores, when if she had been randomly assigned to the morning, she might have done better? It's getting scary here. But here's where it gets super duper scary. Let's talk healthcare. Based on looking at this research for 2 years, there is no way in hell I would let anybody in my family willingly go to a hospital or to an important doctor's appointment in the afternoon, period. I have already changed how my own family navigates the healthcare system based on this research. Example. Anesthesia errors, 4 times more likely at 3 p.m. than at 9 a.m. Hand washing in hospitals. You know, there's a huge problem of hospital-acquired infections. The way to solve that is with hand washing. Hand washing in hospitals is not as high as one would think it is in general. But you measure it over the course of the day, it looks like this. Huge drop-off in hand washing in hospitals in the afternoon. It's early in the morning. We've all just had breakfast. Let's talk about colonoscopies. Colonoscopies. Endoscopists find half as many polyps in afternoon exams as they do in morning exams for the same population. Unnecessary antibiotics. Doctors far more likely to prescribe unnecessary antibiotics in the afternoon versus the morning. Over and over again, no matter what realm we look at, we know this pattern of mood, but we also see significant changes in performance in every realm of life, in the corporate world, in education, in healthcare. Any domain, we see these pretty significant patterns in performance over the course of a day. Let's talk about what we know about this. Then, most important for you as practitioners, let's talk about what we can do about it. Here's what we know. 1, our cognitive abilities don't remain the same over the course of a day. This is really important. Nobody ever told me this. This is a big deal. I think our premise is that we basically should perform at the same level over the day, and that is not true. That is not how human beings work. Our cognitive abilities change over the course of a day. 2, these daily fluctuations are more extreme than we realize. The difference between the daily high point and the daily low point can be significant. 3, the best time to perform a task depends on the nature of the task. So let that sink in for a moment. Our cognitive abilities don't stay the same throughout the day. They change in predictable and somewhat dramatic ways. And when we do something depends on what it is we're doing. Let that seep in. Now we're going to talk about the remedy here. We're going to talk about the remedy. What this suggests is a set of design principles. All this research, I'm just giving you a tiny taste of this. What this research suggests is a set of design principles for figuring out when to do stuff on the job. Here it is. Let's go back to first principles here. Most of us move through the day in 3 stages: a peak, a trough, and a recovery. Peak, trough, recovery. Peak, trough, recovery. Most of us move through it in that order: peak in the morning, trough in the early afternoon, recovery later in the day. However, some of it's affected by what's called a chronotype. That's just your propensity. Do you wake up early and fall asleep early? Do you wake up late and fall asleep late? Some of us are larks. early morning people. Some of us are owls, evening people. Most of us are in between. Here's what the distribution looks like. About 15% of us are hardcore morning people. About 20% of us are hardcore evening people. 2/3 of us are in the middle. It's like many of these kinds of things. It's like most of us are a little bit of both. But there's a dividing line here. And the dividing line is basically owls and non-owls. Non-owls, peak trough recovery fairly predictably. Owls, much more complicated. Much more complicated. Would any of you consider yourselves evening types people? You're more likely to wake up late and go to sleep late? So a handful of you barely have the energy to get your hand in the air this early in the morning. Yeah, so here's the thing, owls. I feel your pain. Because basically the corporate world, the traditional world of work, is designed to crush your soul and suffocate any spirit you have. You're nodding. You know what I'm saying? You're absolutely. I have a lot of empathy for people who are owls. The corporate world is not designed for that. Owls have a much more complicated pattern. They sometimes will go in the reverse order: recovery, trough, peak. But mostly, they have a different peak. Their peak is later in the day and into the evening. So, here's what we know: 3 stages. 80% of us move through in one pattern. 20% of us move through in a different pattern. Let's pay it off here. The peak. Again, which for most of us in the morning, for owls, much later in the day. During our peak, here's the key attribute of being in the peak. The key attribute psychologically of being in the peak is vigilance. This is the word that pays. Vigilance. During the peak, we are most vigilant. What does it mean to be vigilant? Vigilance means you're able to bat away distractions. That's what vigilance is. You're able to stay focused, bat away distractions. That makes the peak the best time for analytic work. Work that requires heads down, heads down, focus, attention, and energy, right? Analytic work, solving problems that require intensity and focus and that kind of sustained, direct kind of deliberation. So during your peak, that's when we're better off writing a report, analyzing data, carefully going through the steps in a strategy. Work that requires heads down, focus, and vigilance. We're better doing, and there's a whole raft of evidence showing we perform better on those tasks during our peak. Again, which for most of us is the morning, for owls, later in the day. Next stage, trough. For most of us, almost all of us, the mid-afternoon, early to mid-afternoon, the trough. The trough is not good for very much. It really isn't. It's not a close call, folks, in the data. Performance drops in almost every dimension of our lives. Performance drops. You see it even in things like auto accidents. Auto accidents, okay, so it's more complicated, not that complicated, but it's a little bit more complicated because there are more auto accidents when there are more cars on the road because there are more chances of cars colliding, okay? So it's pretty simple there, but so you gotta control for that, which is, of course, the sound that statisticians make when they do controls. You gotta control for that, all right? You control for cars on the road. The most dangerous time to be on the road, 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. Not a surprise. It's dark outside, and who the hell is out at that time, right? Second most dangerous time to be on the road in the course of a day, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Trough is not good for very much, so that's when we should be doing our administrative work, work that doesn't require massive, heavy cognitive loads, lots of brain power, lots of creative firepower. That's when we should be doing our administrative work, answering routine emails, filling out our TPS reports, those kinds of things. Final stage, recovery. It's really interesting. Remember our pattern of mood. Peak, trough, recovery. Our mood is back up. For most of us, for the 80% of us, our mood is back up. However, that time of day, you're less vigilant. Higher mood, less vigilance. That seems like a problem, but it's not, because those are almost the ideal conditions for other kinds of problem solvings, other kinds of intellectual work. Elevated mood and reduced vigilance make this a good time for what psychologists call insight problems, problems with non-obvious solutions, things that require iterative thinking. Think about something like brainstorming. Have you ever brainstormed with someone who's in hypervigilant mode? It's terrible brainstorming because they're knocking down ideas left and right. That's not how brainstorming works. There's certain things when you are trying to figure new stuff out, when you're not solving a clean problem, you're solving something a little, you're not even know what problem you're solving, you're trying to iterate new ideas. That combination of heightened mood and less vigilance makes it the ideal time for that. And so, folks, these are your design principles. It's actually not super complicated. It's very clear in the science. Do your analytic work during the peak, do your administrative work during the trough, and do your insight work during the recovery. It's fairly simple and straightforward. Now, there's going to be individual variation. We're not going to say Fred and Ed and Sarah and Maria all should start doing their analytic work at 7:40 a.m. and work for 53 consecutive minutes and take a 14-minute. No way. But these are the design principles. They're very clear. They're backed by literally decades of science. Very simple, very, very clear principles about what we should do and when we should do it. And here's the problem. We don't do that. We don't do that. We don't do that at an individual level. And here I'm a sinner. I'm a writer. I am not a strong lark. I'm not an official lark, but I'm larky. I'm toward that early side of the spectrum. I should be doing my writing in the morning, no question about it. Not even close. So I will come into my office. I work in Washington, D.C. I work in the garage behind my house in Washington, D.C. I come into my office, 8:30 in the morning, 8:15 in the morning. All right, Dan, let's go. Let's get some writing done here. Woo! I'm all ready. It's morning. I'm ready to do some writing. First, got to check some email. Just clear out the email, check it, respond to a few emails, a few more emails, a few more. Okay, clear the decks. I feel good. I've cleared the decks. Ready to do some writing. Maybe have a muffin first. So I'll have a muffin. Then I got to check Twitter. 3 ESPN highlight reels later, it's lunchtime. And I haven't gotten my analytic work done, and so I come into the next stage, to the trough, about the exact worst time I could be doing that kind of work. It's like pedaling a bicycle uphill against the wind. But if you think I'm bad, if you think individuals are bad, organizations are worse. I was talking to somebody right before I came in here about this. Let's talk about meetings. Any of you ever go to meetings? Think about how much time you spend in meetings. Just think about that for a moment. Now, when we schedule meetings, we only use one criterion when we schedule meetings. What is that criterion? Availability. Who said availability? Someone over here. Yes, sir. Availability. Availability. We don't say, what kind of meeting is this? Do we need people to be analytic thinkers? Do we need people to be iterative insight thinkers? Is this purely administrative? Who's going to be there? People who are at their analytic peak in the morning? People who are at their analytic peak in the evening? No. We never, ever, 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 ever ask those kinds of questions. We ask one question. Who's available? Is there a free room? I mean, you should laugh because it's a better alternative to weeping, which is really the reaction you should have on this. If you think about how much time we all spend in meetings and how little strategic thought is given to the when of meetings. Basically none. That's a huge mistake. So, what do we do about all this? Here are some takeaways. Well, here's a startling factoid first. Time of day effects can explain 20% of the variance in human performance on workplace tasks. So your HR executives, you're going to plot out performance, all right? And you're going to say, okay, so some people are really good and some people are less good. There's a variance in the workplace and how people perform. How do we explain that variance? We explain that variance on the job in a number of different ways. Some people are smarter than other people. Some people are more conscientious than other people. Some people have more social advantage than other people. And this is saying 20% of it is the time of day they do what they do. Holy moly, you can actually do something about that. So what do we do about this? Here's what we do. Two takeaways, a meta and a specific. And the specific is obvious as the nose on your face. One, be much more deliberate and intentional in scheduling individual and team work. When people work can affect engagement as much as what they do. We have to take a multidimensional view of engagement. I'm not saying when matters. How many of you, okay, here we go. Let's talk about intentionality. Anybody on the job ever have a to-do list? Raise your hand if you've ever had a to-do list. That's intentionality right there. You're intentional about what you're doing. Scheduling meetings based on availability is not intentionality. It's laziness and lack of strategy. We're intentional about what we do. We're intentional about how we do it. We have an HR function because we're intentional about who we let do it. And yet, we're not intentional when it comes to when. I'm not saying when is more important than what, how, or who, but it's as important. Second, it's this simple, folks. Move analytic tasks to the peak, administrative tasks to the trough, and insight tasks to the recovery. Do it for yourself. Do it for your team. You're in a position in organizations to be kind of like the hub and get it out to the spokes. Let's go to number 2. We spend much, much, much less time here because this is pretty simple. 2, we underestimate the power of breaks. We underestimate the power of breaks. Breaks matter more than we realize. I'll give you an analogy. The science of breaks is where the science of sleep was 15 years ago. About to break through the surface, change how we do what we do. I'm going to give you just one chart here and then some takeaways. This is a chart based on a reasonably well-known study out of Israel. The study out of Israel was a study of parole judges. These judges in Israel were making decisions about prisoners and whether they would have parole. So the prisoners come up, say, I've served 5 years, my sentence was 8 years, but I've been a good, I've been a good citizen and I should be able to go free. So these are pretty fundamental decisions about human liberty. I'm going to show you the chart. The vertical axis of the chart is your likelihood of getting parole. The horizontal axis is time of day. Take a look at this. You come early in the day, your odds are pretty good. Then, boom. The judge has her break, you're back up here. Then, boom. The judge has her break, you're back up here. Then, boom. Now this should alarm us as just citizens, right? I mean, that's kind of terrifying in a way. So think about it. You have a loved one who comes in right before the judge has her break, right before the judge has her first break, you know, like right around there. You got like a 7% chance of getting parole. You happen to be the person coming in after the judge has her break, you're up closer to 70% chance. And remember, when you appear is completely random. It's basically a random assignment, and also it's a function of how long the case before you takes. It's like going to the DMV, you know, and waiting in line, or going to, you know, I guess for all you wellness people, it's like going to Whole Foods and waiting in line, right? Like, you don't know how long it's going to take. It depends on how complicated the transaction is in front of you. So it's all random about when you appear. Here's what I want to point out, though. Look at the judge's decisions before her break and look at it after her break. It's basically like appearing before a different judge. This is the effects of breaks on us. I don't want to suggest that granting parole is always the right decision. It's not. What I want to suggest is that the judge makes different decisions before and after breaks. Here's the way to think about it. The default decision in a parole hearing is not to grant parole. That's the easiest thing for a judge to do. There's no risk to the judge in not granting parole. When is the judge willing to overcome the default? Early in the day and immediately after a break. Because after a break, she's a different judge. This is what we know about breaks have a powerful effect on how we perform. They are generally almost always a performance enhancer. What do we know? We should be taking more breaks and we should be taking certain kinds of breaks. What do we know about the kinds of breaks we should be taking? Once again, the science distills into some very clear design principles. Here's what the science tells us about breaks, the kinds of breaks we should take. Okay, once again, the design principles are really clear. What you need to do is take these principles and put them into action in your own realm. Here's what we know about breaks. 1, something beats nothing. A 1-minute break is better than no break at all. I sometimes, if I'm really pressed, I will do even this kind of a break. It's called you probably have heard of it, called a 20-20-20 break, where is every 20 minutes, I look up from my computer, look at something 20 feet away for 20 seconds. Even that kind of break can be replenishing. 2, what else do we know about breaks? You guys know this. Moving beats stationary. You're better off moving than you are being sedentary during your break. 3, this is very interesting when it comes to this juncture of wellness and engagement. Social beats solo. Breaks with other people are more replenishing than breaks on our own, even for introverts. Amazes me. 4, outside beats inside. The replenishing effects of nature are more powerful than I think most of us realize. 5, this is important, fully detached beats semi-detached. So you're better off not talking about work, and there's research on this. One group goes out during their break, talks about work. One group on their break doesn't talk about work. The group that doesn't talk about work comes back and performs better. Also, leave your phone behind. And again, it's not that complicated. So what this suggests is that take a 10-minute break outside, go for a walk for 10 minutes outside with someone you like, talking about something other than work, leaving your phone on your desk. That's a very cheap performance enhancer right there. So here's what we know about breaks, some takeaways about breaks. 1, don't think of breaks as a deviation from work. Think of them as part of work. And this is where we've gotten it wrong conceptually. We've gotten it wrong conceptually. And once again, I'm a sinner on this front. I was someone who believed always in powering through. Powering through is a way to get more work done. Powering through is a way to get better work done. That is wrong. I had it diametrically wrong. My view was that, oh yeah, amateurs take breaks, but professionals don't. That is 100% false. Amateurs are the ones who don't take breaks. Professionals take breaks. And if you look at any domain of expertise, sports, music, whatever, the people at the very top are intentional and almost maniacal about their breaks. Breaks are part of performance. They're not a deviation from performance. Second, schedule breaks the way you schedule meetings or anything else. Important. Make a break list. This is something I've started to do myself. You can start small here. So what I will do is in the afternoons, I will say right on my list, 1 o'clock, break, and I will go take a 10-minute walk around my neighborhood. That's it, and come back, and it's a help. Or my wife also works at home. So I'll say, you know, at 4 o'clock, I'll say, hey, Jessica, do you want to go to the post office? There's a post office about 7 minutes away from us. We'll walk to the post office, drop something off, and walk back. It's an exciting life, I admit. So a lot of you are looking at me like with a very sad look on your face all of a sudden. But you know what? I'll defend that walk too. So I'll defend that walk to the post office. Here we go. All right. Where are my design principles? All right. That 7-minute walk to the post office. All right. Something beats nothing. I'm moving. Right. I'm with somebody I like. I'm outside, and I leave my phone behind. 14-minute break. That's what we need to be doing. We need to be intentional about our breaks, schedule them, understand that they're part of our work, not a deviation from work. Let me give you one last basket of ideas, then we'll take some questions, have a little discussion. We're going to move from the day to the more episodic nature of our lives. Our lives are a series of episodes. Episodes, by their very nature, have beginnings, middles, and ends. Beginnings exert one influence on our behavior. Midpoints exert another influence on our behavior. Endings exert another influence on our behavior. Let's talk about endings. Some amazing stuff on endings I think is super relevant to what you do here. Endings do a number of different things, but among the things endings help us do is they help us energize and they help us elevate. Let me give you 2 quick studies on this first part. Let me ask you a question. Anybody here ever run a marathon? Okay, a lot of you. All right, here's a question. At what age are people most likely to run their first marathon? Twenty-something, good, okay. Who else has a slightly more specific answer? 26, good guess. This would be the interactive part of the presentation. 37, good, okay. 29, you're right. 29 is right. 29 is the age at which people are most likely to run their first marathon. Why is that? Who said 29? Okay, so you're at the end of your 20s. Tell me your first name. Tiff? Tiff. 29, you're right. It's because you're hitting the end of your 30s. You think that's right? You think that's the reason? Okay, so, but did you run your first marathon at age 29? Oh, interesting. Okay, so let's see how common that is. All right, let's see how typical that is, because I have a chart on this, as I do for almost everything. 29-year-olds. twice as likely to run a first marathon as 28-year-olds. 29-year-olds, twice as likely to run a first marathon as 30-year-olds. Oops. What's going on, Tiff? Just before you're 30. Tell me your first name. Peter. Peter says it's just before you're 30. What's happening? Are there massive I'm not a physician. Are there massive physiological differences between a 28-year-old and a 29-year-old? Probably not. Between a 29-year-old and a 30-year-old? Probably not. What's happening, Peter? Oh, nicely said. Peter says it's a teachable moment, right? It's a moment, though. That's actually a really nice way to put it. It's an end. Something as arbitrary as the end of a decade, endings energize us. When the end of something becomes salient, we kick a little harder. Here's another question for you. What's another age, maybe about 10 years later, at which people are disproportionately likely to run a first marathon? 39. Peter, what's another age at which people are disproportionately likely to run a first marathon? 49. And Peter, as luck would have it, I have that chart. 49-year-olds, 3 times more likely to run a first marathon than 50-year-olds. When we get to the end of something, it energizes us. I want you to think about that principle in your own work, particularly when it comes to benefits. All right, let me give you one more. So, key principle of endings. When the end of something becomes salient, we kick a little harder. When the end of something becomes salient, it energizes us. Here's another example. I think this has huge relevance to benefits. Here's another study. I'm going to draw, imagine I was a much more generous person than I really am. I draw a line down the center of the road and I say, I'm giving everybody here a gift certificate for $150. Everybody gets a gift certificate for $150, but I'm going to treat it differently. You over here, your gift certificate expires in 3 weeks. You over here, your gift certificate expires in 2 months. Who's more likely to use the gift certificate? You think this group over here. Okay, you might be surprised by that. This group over here, you had 3 weeks to use the gift certificate. It's free money. Remember, gift certificate is free money. You're a fool if you don't use it. 31% of people cash in the gift certificate after 3 weeks. This group had more time, though. How did they do? 6% of them cashed it in. Now, if you think about that, it makes no sense. This group had over twice as much time to do something, and they did it at 1/5 the rate. What's going on here? Think about this in terms of signups and benefits and all these other kinds of things. What we think, our instincts are wrong. Give people a longer fuse, they're more likely to do it. Give people a shorter fuse, the ending becomes salient, they're more likely to act. You see this in, there's a great study of organ donation. I give you let's sign up to be an organ donor. You have a month, you don't have a deadline. We come back 2 years later, who signed up to be an organ donor? This group, much more than this group over here. This group had a month, this group had forever, this group did it more. Endings help us energize. One more principle of endings, then we'll go to the discussion, some questions and things like that. I've got some good news and some bad news, a very, very famous line. I've got some good news and some bad news. Who said this? I was curious, who said this? I've got some good news and some bad news. So I went to the Google to do some research, and I found that it was everybody. Everybody has said this. So what do you give first? You understand this. HR people are always giving good news and bad news. What do you give first? Good news or bad news? Here's what I do. I give the good news first. I'll tell you why. It's uncomfortable giving bad news, so it's easier for me when I ease into it. Why else? Think about it from the other person's perspective. If I hit people with bad news straight out of the gate, they're going to shut down. They're not going to listen to what I'm saying. Why else? I don't want to come off as a jerk, right? I want to have a cushion before I lay down the hammer. Makes perfect sense. Let me ask you another question, though. When you're on the receiving end of the good news and the bad news, what do you want to hear first, the good news or the bad news? How many people want to hear the good news first? How many people want to hear the bad news first? Overwhelmingly, this is the case. 4 to 5 people prefer to begin with a loss or negative outcome and ultimately end with a gain or positive outcome rather than the reverse. Turns out I was doing it wrong. I want the bad news first. I just didn't think other people could handle that. But I'm wrong because I'm not that special. In general, human beings prefer endings that so they say our findings suggest that doctors, teachers, and partners might do a poor job of giving good news and bad news because they forget for a moment how they want to hear news when they are patients, students, and spouses. Given a choice, human beings prefer endings that elevate. We prefer rising sequences at the end to declining sequences at the end. Rising sequences at the end to declining sequences at the end. Endings play a huge role in our well-being, in our memory, in our whole evaluation of experiences. How it ends is extremely important. You want a rising sequence versus a declining sequence. One more study, then we'll go to some discussion. Study of Hershey's Kisses, done at the University of Michigan. Hershey's Kisses, done at the University of Michigan. What the researchers did is they set up a table in the University of Michigan Student Center. They said, please come in and would you like to participate in our taste test of Hershey's Kisses? They treated, they're made with local ingredients. So they approach people, tell me you're for Celeste. So Celeste comes in, walking through you didn't go to the University of Michigan, did you? No. So walking through the Student Center of the University of Michigan, we say, Celeste, would you like to do a taste test of Hershey's Kisses? And Celeste says, sure. So we say, Celeste, here's a first candy. Please taste it and rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. Then we say to Celeste, here's your next one. Here's your next one. Here's your next one. And here's your next one. She ends up getting 5, but she doesn't know how many she's getting at the outset. Okay? Then we go, tell me your first name. Jill. We go to Jill. Jill, would you like to participate in this Hershey's Kiss taste test? Absolutely, Jill says, with the proper amount of enthusiasm. Here's your first candy. Please taste it and rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. Here's your next one. Here's your next one. Here's your next one. Now listen carefully. Here's your last one. She gets 5. She doesn't know how many she's getting. But the last one is identified as the last one, which is not the case for Celeste. Does calling that Hershey's Kiss, okay, spoiler alert, all the candies are the same. Does calling it the last one change Jill's evaluation of the chocolate? Let's go to one final chart on this. The gray bars are Celeste. The yellow bars are Jill. So if you look here, so that's not a statistically significant difference. So they're about the same, they're about the same, they're about the same, they're about the same. You get to the 5th kiss, boom, look at that. People in the Jill group loved that 5th candy. They loved it, they loved it, they loved it. They loved it more than any candy they ate. They loved it more than any candy anybody ate by a wide margin. It was the same freaking candy. What's going on here? Given a choice, human beings prefer endings that elevate. So let's talk about some takeaways on endings. Takeaway number 1, shine a light on endings to energize yourself and others. Make endings salient. When the ending becomes salient, people kick a little harder. 2, always give the bad news first. For reals. None of this feedback sandwich nonsense. For reals, don't. It's a bad idea. First of all, it's the most, you ever get to, it's like having a kid, and when they get to be like maybe 5, you know, you can like a 3 or 4-year-old, you can use reverse psychology, all right? And so you can say, oh, there's no way that you would want to, there's no way that you would pick up your room now. That's something you would never do, all right? And then, so a 3-year-old would be totally faked out by that. When they get to be like 4 and a half, they go to you, Dad, you're using reverse psychology. It ain't going to work, all right? Same thing with a feedback sandwich. Everybody knows what you're doing. Always give the bad news first. Highlight the last chocolate. I don't know what this means, but I want you to think about that study. I think it has huge implications. What you identify as last, what you select as last, what you position in the final spot is powerful. And finally, use endings as meaning makers. Endings trigger a search for meaning. That's what's going on with those marathon runners. Use endings as meaning makers. Let me stop there. So what we can do now is I'd like to ask, what I'd like to do is take a couple of questions. But as I take a question, I want to actually give you a particular challenge. I would like you to do something here. What I'd like you to do, in fact, maybe we'll do this. Maybe we'll take 3 minutes, no, 2.5 minutes. 2.5 minutes. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to let this stuff simmer for a little bit. And I want you to write down one thing that you'll do differently when you get back to the office based on what you've heard here today. So let's take 2.5 minutes of that. We'll read those out and then take some questions. So but literally 2.5 minutes, no more than that. I might even give you it's down to 2 minutes, 2 minutes. Because I really want your first impressions, and I don't want to dawdle here. So we'll read those out, and then what we'll do is we'll take some questions and then offer other kinds of advice. Does that work for you, Stephen, that methodology that I'm? Great, okay. Because what I'm trying to do is have people, gave you a bunch of takeaways, but I'd like you to leave with your own personalized takeaway. But I also want to be able to answer your questions, because that's going to allow you to turn the dials on your own particular behaviors and actually leave here armed with something cool and important to do. All right, you have a little over a minute left. All right, you got less than a minute. And I will look for volunteers to read out what they intend to do. If we don't get sufficient number of volunteers, I will just select the table, and everyone at the table will read it out, whether you're an owl or a lark. All right, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Who wants to read out something they're going to do? Yes, sir. Can we, do we have mics? Yeah, Shelby has a microphone for you, so give us a sec.
Hi, I'm Dave Eisbinger at the State of Washington, and I deal with 2 governing boards, and all of our half-day meetings start at 1 o'clock.
Oh.
18 minutes ago, I emailed my administrative assistant and said all future meetings start at 9 a.m.
Great, all right. All right. We're going to turn this into like a Baptist revival now here. We're going to stand up and testify and then hoot and holler after they do that. Fine by me. So great. So why did you schedule the meetings, Dave, at 1 p.m. in the first place?
A lot of people were traveling, and we didn't want to pay for overnight accommodations.
You don't want to. Okay, that makes sense. Actually, that's actually a logical reason. People are traveling. You don't want to pay for overnight accommodations.
Yep.
So now, you know.
But I think a $100 hotel for 3 people is worth it.
It's 3 people at $100 a pop?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can afford that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know the fiscal condition of the state of Washington, but I'm assuming that it can spend. Yeah, because if you think about it, you know, you'll probably get more and better. You'll probably get more and better. You'll probably get more and better work done, and that's not an unusual. Setting. In fact, I'll retestify to my personal experience. I had my mother-in-law had to have some fairly significant surgery done outside of where she lived. And they wanted to schedule it. They say, "We'll fly in and we'll do this in the afternoon." And we're like, "No." And so we'll pay that $100 for the hotel room so you can go in for your sleep overnight and get that 7:30 a.m. surgery. And that's what we're thinking about here. So if you think about, you know, because you probably spend a lot of time poring over what's the agenda going to be, what are we going to discuss, and then this question of when we do it. But now you're being intentional about when. So way to go, Dave. Who else? Who else? That was a good one. It's hard to follow, but Peter's going to go. And I will call on people. I have no problem.
So I don't really have control over this, but, you know, I'm the medical director for USAA, and we run, I mean, a big part of our business is call centers.
Yeah.
And so we give people 2 20-minute breaks and 35 minutes for lunch.
Yep.
And so I'm going to bring back the idea that we should split those breaks up and give them more breaks, maybe less time. Because the quality of service when people call is like the most important thing we do. And so if we can give people more breaks and they can, get recharged and, be better on the phone, that would be an important thing to do.
Great, thank you, Peter. So let me, I think it's a great idea. Let me offer sort of a suggestion based on that. Now, I mean, what is great is that, USAA is such a high-performing enterprise to begin with. I mean, it's always rated as one of the best places to work, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that the real key here for Peter is, what I would suggest is actually, and this is a really important meta point, especially in HR, is test it, Peter. Okay? That might not be right, all right? It might, those 20-minute breaks. So what I would do is I would spend some of your time, or maybe even divide up the folks. Have some of them do the traditional 20-minute breaks, and have some of them do this revised, the Peter plan of 4 10s rather than 2 20s, and see if you get a difference in customer experience. The other thing, even more radical, is maybe people need more breaks. Maybe they need 3 20-minute breaks. And so, but this is the way to think about it. You have to, and I really mean this, like especially in HR, you know, with the rise of big data, that I think executives and leaders, what we really need to be doing more and more of is acting like scientists. What do scientists do? They have hypotheses and they test them. They don't know whether they have the right answers, but they know which questions to ask, and they test it. There's a huge amount of A/B testing in the digital world. I think that ethic of A/B testing has to come back to the world, the Peter's flesh and blood world, where, you know, the ground truth of someone with an insurance claim calling into USAA, is that person going to get better service if the account executive or whatever the customer service agent has 4 breaks of 10 or 2 breaks of 20 or better 3 breaks of 20? Who else? Yes?
I'm volunteering because I have a question for you later, so I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay.
But my team stretches at 10 in the morning for 15 minutes by Skype across the country, and I'm going to add a 2 o'clock walking break.
Nice.
For the team,
okay.
So.
And again, tell me your first name.
Kathleen.
Kathleen, yeah. Kathleen, see if there's a difference. See if there's a difference. And why'd you pick 2? I'm not arguing with it. I'm just curious.
It's halfway between with all the time changes because I
Great.
have staff coast to coast.
Well done. I like it. Who else has one? Yes. And then we'll take 1 or 2 more, and then we'll take Kathleen and others' questions. Yes.
Hi, I'm Melissa from Brunswick. We, as part of our program design, we have 3 enterprise-wide challenges, and we usually do a lot for the kickoff of the first one, and the third one gets significantly less attention and promotion. And so with feedback from, you know, endings have significance, we are going to promote the heck out of the last one this year, I think, to really drive sustained engagement. That's
a great, I mean, that's a great idea. And you can even do it, I mean, I think when you think about programming for those kinds of things, you know, you have to be intentional about what you do when. I think there's a huge opportunity for meetings or offsites or anything like that to be much more intentional about the temporal architecture of that whole thing. Particularly what you're talking about is the end. The ends affect, tell me your first name again?
Melissa.
Melissa. What Melissa, one of the things that Melissa is picking up on is that endings affect how we remember experiences and lives and everything disproportionately. Disproportionately. So the entirety of the experience that people at Brunswick will have on a particular session is going to be shaped significantly by how it ends, how meaningful it is, how significant it is, how novel it is, how interesting it is, how engaging it is. So you sort of have a double whammy there. You can think about, we have 3, let's make the end one great, but within the end one, let's make the end of the end even better. And that's the kind of intentionality we're talking about. We had somebody over here, yeah, Shelby, yeah.
Hi, I'm a Global Diversity and Inclusion Manager for a technology consulting company, and I'm going to do 2 things.
Okay.
1, I'm going to stop feeling guilty about taking breaks.
Oh, bless you. What's your first name?
Erica.
Erica, all right, good.
And 2nd, I'm going to look for ways in which I can schedule my time, but particularly any proposals I'm making, much differently, so that they have a higher success, hopefully a higher success rate.
Great points on that. And I like the way you say that, because that's what we're talking about here. It's a higher success rate. Here's the thing, like a lot of stuff isn't good. Like let's say that you are, let's say you're pitching an idea, all right? And what we know pretty clearly is that when you're asking somebody to do something, asking them to make a decision, you're asking your boss for a raise, anything like that. The default decision among decision makers is no in most cases. People come to any decision-making opportunity with a default decision in their back pocket, and the default decision is almost always no. So you ask, and if any of you are in sales, you go to a prospect, the default answer for a prospect is no, right? You ask your boss for a raise, the default answer is going to be no, right? You ask somebody out for a date, the default answer is going to be no. I mean, that was my experience. And so to Erica's point, you got it you explained it perfectly. What you're talking about is you want to increase your odds of success here. So what we know is that people are more likely to overcome the default early in the day and immediately after breaks. Now, what does that mean? You said higher success rate. That's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about rates. We're not talking about having it locked down, all right? So if you're going to ask for something, and let's say in typical circumstance, you have a 17% chance of getting a yes, and if you pick the right time and are intentional about that, you can dial that up to a 21% chance of getting a yes. You still have a 79% chance of getting a no, all right? The odds are still against you, but what you've done, but I will take that. I will take that turn from 17% to 21% if it's something I'm doing over and over again, because over time, that's going to work hugely in my advantage. So I love the way that that's precisely the way to think about this kind of stuff. You're increasing your odds of success. Let's take one more and then we'll take some questions. Somebody else. Yes. There's a mic right behind you.
We're on the question phase, or no?
Oh, we can take questions now, yeah.
No, we can wait for that. I can go along with her. Anyways, my name's Donna Darrow, and I'm from Meritor, and we actually, I think I'm going to just be more strategic about when I set up meetings, the leaders that I'm meeting with, or the teams around the globe that we're meeting with, and just being more intentional about the timing of that and the type of meeting we're having.
Great. Great idea. So, so Donna, you have a question too? Because we can start with the questions. Did you have a question or no? Okay, Donna has a question, then we'll go to Kathleen, and then we'll take some other questions.
So along those lines, it would also have to do with the global nature of our workforce and the timing of that. I mean, any recommendations on, again, if we're looking to have more analytic exploration, like, and I know different time zones and things like that, but we're in 22 countries and. Yeah,
no, it's a great point. So you're talking about, say, how do you deal with something like a conference call across, how do you time a conference call across different time zones? Okay, it's a great question, big issue. There isn't an easy answer to that. All right, first principles. You have to think about the brain in our head. All right, our brains evolved in a very different, literally physical landscape. Our brains evolved in a world where there were not hours, let alone time zones. So it is completely unnatural to be talking to someone who is in another part of the world, sometimes on another day. That is just not what our brains were meant to do. And so it ends up being really, really difficult. So what you have to do is you have to make the best of an imperfect situation. I think that there are two ways to do that, maybe more. One of them is this. Think about a conference call. All right? Just want to take a step back and think about a conference call. And a conference call or a meeting of any kind is basically a collection of tasks to be done, questions to be answered. It's a collection of things to be done, right? And I want you, for these trans time zone conference calls, think about the conference call. What are the tasks that need to be done, the questions that need to be answered? And then ask yourself very strategically, can any of these be done asynchronously, right? Does everything in here that we have to do have to be done in real time? With Fred in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and Maria in Madrid, and Hector in Taipei. Well, there's probably nobody in Taipei named Hector, but Hector in Taipei, all right? Can any of this stuff be done asynchronously? And probably some of the things can be done. So what you can do is you can take some of those tasks out of the real-time conversation and have people do them whenever they want it. Let's be specific here. Let's say you're talking about new ideas for a strategy or new ideas for a product or something like that. Having somebody come on, like for me, if you have me on a conference call and my job is to generate new ideas and the conference call is at 11 p.m. because it's morning in Asia, I ain't going to be at my best. All right? So what you should do instead is say, okay, guys, here's what we'll do. We'll do the idea generation part asynchronously, send it around first, and then let's do the discussion of it synchronously because that's something that needs to get done synchronously. So take pieces of it, do it asynchronously. That's one modest solution to that. The second solution to that would be, and again, it's a hard problem to solve perfectly, is spread the pain. So it isn't always, unless it's a client or customer. If it's, you always want the client or customer to be at their most advantageous time, and you take the pain on that. But when you're talking about your team, you want to spread the pain. So the people in Taipei have to be at suboptimal time sometimes. The people in what did I say, Madrid, the people in Sheboygan. And that's basically what you can do. And I think you'll find that a lot more stuff can be done asynchronously than you realize. And that will also shorten the calls. Kathleen also had one. We have a microphone for Kathleen.
You were fairly gender neutral in all of the studies except for the Israeli study, and you referred to the judge as a her repeatedly, and I didn't know if there was a female judge study or if that was just inadvertent.
That was just inadvertent.
Okay, I just was curious if they had looked male to female.
Yeah. Yeah, there isn't a huge amount of variation, male to female. I mean, sort of embedded in there is a question about gender differences, which is really important. What you see in gender differences are not massive. What you see, though, you see some in chronotype, in basically propensity to be early or late.
Right, men have delayed sleep phase.
Exactly. Men end up being owlier than women. And so what you also have is, well, you also have age differences in chronotypes too. So little kids tend to be very larky, as any parent of little kids will remember or knows. They get up early, they start running around like crazy people right from the outset. All right, around anybody who has teenagers or remembers being a teenager in your mid-teens, there is a massive move toward greater lateness, much owlier. That goes on to about the mid-20s. And then for most people, again, 80% of us, there's a gradual return to larkiness over time. But what you see is men are owlier than women in general. Men return to larkiness more slowly than women. And so what you often have, there's actually research on this, it's pretty interesting, is you have in heterosexual couples, you often have incompatible sleeping times. Heterosexual couples are the same age. You often have incompatible sleeping times. So the man is falling asleep in a heterosexual couple 30, 40, 45 minutes later than the woman. So I don't have a takeaway on that one, folks. Who else has a question? We have time for one more question. Oh, sorry, right over there.
I was just thinking, the architecture of the brakes that you describe, it feels like there could be habits that people could do that could slow the decline into the trough, if say with proper fueling during brakes, and then also allow us to potentially maybe interval our day where the trough becomes shorter if we recover.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I wondered what your thoughts might be on things we could focus.
It's a really interesting idea. I don't know, but I think it's something worth trying. My guess is that there's going to be you could probably make a little progress in limiting the duration of the trough. My guess is that, and it's just a guess, is that you're not going to make massive progress doing that, but you can probably make a little bit of that, because this trough is a fairly enduring feature of human beings. It's one reason why you have cultures that had for a long time a siesta culture, where there was this break in the afternoon. That wasn't like sloth or laziness. It was basically a response to people understanding their bodies, thinking about their bodies. And you can also go even further. I mean, there's probably an evolutionary reason for why we have that midday trough, in that, when we were evolving, okay, we didn't have air-conditioned ballrooms. We got out of the trees, get down on the savannah. Oh, we don't have a lot of covering here. Man, oh man, that sun is pretty hot. And so people had a propensity to get sleepy when the sun was at its hottest, probably took a nap under the tree. People who didn't have that propensity stayed out in the sun and died, or got eaten by a saber-toothed tiger and didn't pass their genes along. And therefore, all of us are, at one point there was an evolutionary advantage to that early day trough. And so, and I think it's a great question to end on. Let me do this. In this research, not a joke, there's good news and bad news. The bad news is that we still are not making timing decisions in a strategic way. We're barely even making those decisions. We're making them with the amount of deliberation and strategic insight that we bring to what kind of paper towel should we have in the restroom. All right? We're just not thinking about it strategically, and it's a big strategic question. The good news here is that there's a lot of gain that you can get out of this for a limited investment. And that's rare, all right? You guys know that, all right? It's hard to get gains in general, and a lot of gains require a massive firepower. So if you can get decent gains with limited investment, that's a big win in any kind of organization. And the other thing, tell me your first name, the gentleman who asked that question. Steve. So to Steve's question, Steve hits on a really, really important point, which is the following, and I'll end on this, which is this. We have to start thinking about ourselves a little bit differently, right? Human beings are temporal creatures. You all heard about a biological clock. That's not quite right. We basically have biological clocks in every cell in our body. The people who won the Nobel Prize in Medicine last year were chronobiologists who are helping identify some of these things. We have biological clocks in every cell in our body. We are, at some level, timepieces ourselves. And we're also living in time. We're living in this temporal landscape, right? Everything you do is episodic. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Every career, beginning, middle, and end. Every employee tenure, beginning, middle, and end. Life of a company, beginning, middle, and end. We're temporal creatures. Even in their gathering here today has a temporal side of it. I don't want to get woo-woo on you, but you know, this discussion, our conversation began in the past. Whoa, it's already done. But at one point, that was the future. This conversation is going to end in the future. Whoa. I'm uttering this sentence in the present. Whoa! All right? It's like time and timing is all around us. And if we're blind to that, we're going to miss out on opportunities. But if we're awake to that, I really think we can do what many of you are aspiring to, certainly what LimeMate is aspiring to, is building workplaces where people do better, accomplish more, and feel better. And that'd be a great win for all of us. Thanks for your time.
All right. With Dan's advice, we're actually going to take a break. Everybody hit the pool. Come back at 11 p.m. We'll start again. No, we are going to take a break. It's only going to be 45 minutes. We hope that you network. Get a chance. Dan will be signing copies of his book, When, The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing. I think there's a little low-key Abbott and Costello skit that Dan planned when he said, I want to sign the book. When? Yes. Some of you got that. Get it? When? Yes, that's what I'm going to do. Sign the book when. All right, I promise to be better at my jokes when I come back from my trough. So take a break. It'll be 45 minutes, and we'll get back to it. Thanks, guys.
It's your thing.